Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, and thank you to the witnesses here today to discuss biosimilars can lower costs for patients and provide greater and more affordable access to care. As we discussed in our first subcommittee hearing of this Congress in terms of our national issues and chronic disease epidemic, it's extremely costly just in terms of the healthcare system, but also our fellow American patient. In fact, 90% of our $4.5 trillion in healthcare costs last year was tied to chronic diseases. It's hard to believe, but they're saying 90%. 42% of Americans have 2 or more chronic diseases, such as diabetes, cancer, heart disease. Today's hearing is an important step in lowering health costs and improving our outcomes, and we must continue to find longer-term ways to improve the health of our patients and our nation. Thankfully, we live in an era of innovation where researchers and manufacturers are developing new and complex treatments and cures. Medicines such as cell and gene therapy, these drugs have improved millions of lives for patients with Alzheimer's and other diseases. We also are able to bring these treatments to patients through lower-cost biosimilar options. Since entering the market in 2015, biosimilars have saved the entire healthcare system over $23.6 billion. Within the medical program, the biosimilars reduced Part B spending by $4.5 billion in 2020 alone. Biosimilars launched at prices up to 35% lower than branded drugs, and they can drive further savings when they compete with drugs already on the marketplace. The marketplace competition, lower costs for all patients in the insurance markets will provide safe and effective treatments options for patients. Biosimilars also help increase drug supply and availability and have been used in nearly 700 million days of patient therapy. Still significant work needs to be done to ensure this in terms of moving forward. This ranges from making our drugs reimbursement systems work correctly to incentivize markets competition to improve patient and providers' education and awareness. Our healthcare system stands to save $181 billion over the next 5 years by reducing the barriers to biosimilars adoption, and I hope this hearing can help accelerate that goal. We are about to hear from a great group of folks who represent many aspects of the biosimilar market, including those involved firsthand in the care delivery and those working behind the scenes to bring about these drugs to the marketplace. I look forward to working with all of our colleagues with Congress to reduce the impact of chronic disease epidemics by making innovative treatments more accessible and affordable throughout the biosimilars. So with that, I want to introduce the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I hope this is really the first of a number of hearings to explore the waste and abuse that is rampant in the pharmaceutical industry. Few industries are so zealous in doing all they can to prevent competition. Few are so overpaid, and few have invested so effectively in this Congress to maintain their privileged position and to avoid the slightest accountability. All of this has to be considered in connection with Trump's DOGE attack on science, on research, on the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes of Health. He is not eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse there, but rather settling old scores, accepting ludicrous conspiracy theories, and building a body count of how many public servants he can fire. The health of our nation will suffer from this wrongdoing. Consumers will be paying even more for less as innovative research is decimated by this recent Trump-Musk rampage. With no explanation provided, for example, support was abruptly terminated for the groundbreaking vial research that has been conducted by award-winning scientist Dr. Jason McClellan and his team at the University of Texas in Austin. Called one Monday and told their project ended the next Monday with no explanation. Elsewhere, funds have been cut for clinical trials upon which patients rely, in seeking life-saving cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, and more. And exports, of course, have been removed randomly from the FDA and the NIH that are essential participants in the development and approval of new therapies, all thanks to DOJ's abrupt layoffs in a disgraceful display designed to humiliate dedicated public servants. Many turned away without any prior notice as they arrived at work. After being forced out from his role overseeing vaccine development and approval at the FDA, Dr. Peter Marks shed light on that shattered agency. He said, quote, "It has become clear that truth and transparency are not desired by the Secretary, but rather he wishes subservient confirmation of his misinformation and lies." Taxpayers fund, of course, most innovative research. Every new drug approved from 2010 to 2019 was developed with some taxpayer funding. And while the early stage basic research is critical in what we often think of in terms of the public investment, taxpayers are often called upon to fund late-stage development and clinical trials. The newly approved drugs with the highest clinical value are rooted in taxpayer funding. And these innovative treatments, like Sandy for prostate cancer, which was almost solely developed with public funding, PrEP treatments to prevent HIV infections, gene therapies to treat cancer, and so much more. And of course, the DOJ approach looks only at the spending side and totally ignores the real waste and abuse that grows out of the tax scam that was so proudly approved in this committee in 2017. In the year 2023, for example, Pfizer, Merck, and Johnson & Johnson paid nothing in corporate taxes, though each made tens of billions of dollars in revenue while charging America so much more than consumers in any other country and repeatedly spiking prices. We should be eliminating the many tax loopholes that allow Big Pharma to avoid paying for the national security upon which it relies, closing tax-dodging loopholes that allow them to offshore profits, write off their aggressive advertising expenses, and further enrich themselves by spending more on stock buybacks and dividends than in innovative research and development. For a handful of drugs, prices will be somewhat lower next year thanks to the Democratic legislation finally providing a very narrow Medicare negotiation program. At least we hope that happens, though Big Pharma is throwing everything at it that it can to block that. Instead of ignoring the outlandish drug prices with which Americans are being ripped off, we should be eliminating lengthy delays before a drug is eligible for negotiation, ensuring prices are negotiated on drugs with limited competition, and extending the benefits of negotiation to all Americans, including the uninsured, not just those covered by Medicare. And of course, the latest disastrous Trump adventure in incompetence is called Liberation Day, which is liberating thousands of dollars from the wallets of Americans through Trump tariff taxes, threatening the future of so many small businesses with soaring costs and playing golf while the markets have lost, since he came into office, about $11 trillion, 6 or 7 just last week. The pharmaceutical industry is apparently exempted from these tariff taxes initially, but he's promised they're coming. The only thing that will be accomplished by taxing pharmaceuticals with tariffs will be to make the world's most expensive medications for Americans even more expensive and out of reach. We do indeed need a true Liberation Day, a day when my colleagues finally liberate themselves from Big Pharma's stranglehold over this Congress. And I yield back.
Thank you. I will now introduce the witnesses. Dr. Debbie Pratt, President of the Community Oncology Alliance. Dr. Colin is the Director of the Healthcare Group. Craig Burton is the Executive Director of Biosimilar Council, and Dr. Aaron Kesselheim is Professor of Medicine at Harvard University. Thank you for all joining us today. Your written statements will be made part of a hearing record, and each of you will have 5 minutes to deliver your oral remarks. Dr. Pratt, you're recognized. It's hard to pronounce, but it's Kesselheim.
Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the subcommittee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify on the critical issue of biosimilars and their role in improving patient care and affordability in cancer treatment. As background, I'm an oncologist specializing in breast cancer in Austin, Texas. I serve in the leadership of Texas Oncology, a private, physician-owned, independent community oncology practice that's part of the U.S. Oncology Network, and I serve as the president of the Community Oncology Alliance, a nonprofit organization that represents cancer patients and their independent community oncology practices across the country. It's important to understand that as cancer treatment continues to evolve, it's imperative that we consider the factors influencing the development and utilization of biosimilars compared to their biologic originator products. As a breast cancer specialist, I use biosimilars in my practice daily, knowing that these are the highest quality products that are both effective and affordable to the patients I serve, and are much more affordable than their reference originator biologics. You may question why I would use less expensive biosimilars rather than the more expensive originator biologic, especially given the reimbursement structure. But the answer is simple: patient affordability. Every day as an oncologist, we see patients who simply cannot afford their treatments. Our job as physicians includes being advocates for our patients and doing whatever is possible to make their treatments as affordable as possible. Biosimilars offer that affordability, but the reimbursement landscape is perilous and not necessarily viable for physicians because there are situations where the acquisition and related costs of using biosimilars can be greater than the reimbursement. Two pressing concerns with biosimilars and ensuring a long-term healthy biosimilars market are two market distortions dealing with the insurance companies and their PBMs and the 340B drug pricing program. PBMs and their related insurers often force physicians not to use the most effective and affordable drugs for our patients, but the most profitable drugs for those corporations, because they are allowed to use safe harbor rebates to force concessions from pharmaceutical manufacturers. These profit-seeking corporations can mandate the use of a more expensive originator biologic or a specific biosimilar most profitable to them when there are multiple biosimilars available to treat a specific cancer. This can create logistical nightmares for practices having to stock multiple biosimilars when different PBMs favor their most profitable biosimilar. At a macro market level, PBMs threaten the viability of a healthy biosimilar market. And I'll add that these corporate entities have now started even sourcing their own private label biosimilars to even further increase their profitability. Another market distortion impacting the increased use of biosimilars is 340B hospitals, which are significantly overpaid for drugs by CMS. Because these, quote, nonprofit facilities make substantial profits on drugs, they are incentivized to use the most expensive drugs, especially the more expensive originator biologics, rather than biosimilars, as several studies have documented. This is another market distortion that threatens the long-term viability of the biosimilars market. We need a healthy free market environment for biosimilars that delivers on the promise of making new biologics available to oncologists and other specialists treating life-threatening diseases. Over the next decade, some 118 biologics are expected to lose patent protection, presenting an opportunity for an estimated $234 billion in savings from biosimilars. In conclusion, while biosimilars represent a promising opportunity to enhance patient access and reduce costs for cancer therapies and other disease treatments, the current landscape presents significant challenges. To foster a more favorable environment for biosimilars, I recommend the following actions. First, simplify the approval process for biosimilars to encourage competition while maintaining safety and efficacy standards. Second, reform rebate practices to eliminate their use of biosimilars by removing their safe harbor protections. Third, stop pharmaceutical manufacturers from providing 340B discounts on biologics that have biosimilar competition. Fourth, increase physician reimbursement for biosimilars to ASP plus 10% and remove the 2% sequester cuts from these products. Fifth, establish a floor price for biosimilars that ensures market stability. Sixth, provide incentives and funding for the research and development of biosimilars specifically in this country, targeting small and mid-sized companies. Finally, engage with healthcare providers to increase awareness of the benefits and safety profiles of biosimilars, helping to promote their adoption and patient treatment. Addressing these factors can help ensure that cancer patients have access to a broader range of effective, more affordable treatment options, ultimately leading to improved health outcomes and reduced healthcare costs. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and thank you for your service.
And thank you, Dr. Edgerton. You are now recognized.
Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm Dr. Colin Edgerton. I'm a community rheumatologist in Charleston, South Carolina. I've been practicing rheumatology for 20 years in the community currently, and prior to that, 12 years as a U.S. Army physician as a rheumatologist, to include deploying to Iraq to support our nation's heroes there. Rheumatology uses biologic medications very heavily, and they have been life-changing for our patients. Prior to the advent of biologics, we had few effective therapies for diseases that led to inevitable disability and early death for our patients. It has been incredible to see the impact of biologic agents on our patients, but we are facing some headwinds regarding the expense of these medications and patient access. The CDC estimates that 21% of adults over the age of 18 have doctor-diagnosed arthritis, so we're talking about a quarter of our population that are potentially going to be treated with biologic agents in the future. Biosimilars have opened up the possibility of greater patient access by significantly reducing the costs associated with treatment for our patients, and we've been very excited to see biosimilars. Have been waiting for them for decades in rheumatology, and now we're living in the biosimilar age. Unfortunately, we are seeing some market distortions that are making access for our patients very difficult, and I'm excited to talk about that with you today. One of the key distortions has been a problem with pharmacy benefit managers offering rebates, or extracting rebates, rather, from the manufacturers of the drugs in order to place these drugs on their formularies. Because of the rebates, this reduces the average sales price, or ASP, for these biologic agents. This has led to what we call an underwater situation with the biologic agents, where the reimbursement for the biologic or biosimilar is actually less than the cost of the drug, and therefore patients cannot access the biosimilars. So these are the cheaper drugs. These are oftentimes the drugs that are preferred on the formulary, and the patient cannot access the drug because, again, the cost of the drug is actually higher than the reimbursement. And this is all due to rebates that are being extracted by pharmacy benefit managers. These distortions are a big problem for us in medicine. We'll highlight that pharmacy benefit managers are very opaque organizations that are not accountable to providers like me. I can't meet with them. I can meet with insurance companies. I can meet with the manufacturers, but we cannot meet or talk with the PBMs as providers. I'll also note that the PBMs don't create medications, they don't manufacture them, and they don't care for patients either. They are true middlemen that are extracting billions of dollars from our healthcare system and showing very little as far as results. So what can we do about improving access for our patients with biosimilars? We have several recommendations. One of these is increasing the transparency in drug pricing, especially with respect to biologics and the biosimilars. We feel that this transparency will help both the providers and patients understand the costs involved and foster a more equitable marketplace. Specifically, we need to amend the Social Security Act to temporarily provide an 8% add-on to the provider's acquisition cost of all biosimilar products. Secondly, we recommend amending Section 1847A, Subpart C4, to extend the Secretary's authority to use wholesale acquisition cost, also known as WAC, W-A-C, plus 3% until the ASP, or average sales price, reaches sustainable levels as determined by the Secretary. And thirdly, we recommend amending Section 1847A, Subpart C3, to permanently remove manufacturer rebates from the ASP methodology for biosimilars so that we don't have the underwater biosimilar problem that we currently face. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
And thank you, Mr. Burton. You are now recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, members of the committee. Thank you for having me today. My name is Craig Burton. I'm the Executive Director of the Biosimilars Council, which is a division of the Association for Accessible Medicines. Our mission is to increase patient access to life-saving, lower-cost biosimilar medicines. In the 10 years since biosimilars have first come to market, biosimilar use has already saved the U.S. healthcare system nearly $36 billion Importantly, they've also resulted in greater Americans' access to care by more than 450 million days of therapy that would not have occurred had biosimilars not been on the market. They're used by patients with cancer, diabetes, arthritis, and many other conditions who depend on biosimilars for their life-saving care. But despite their value, biosimilars are at a critical juncture. According to a groundbreaking IQVIA Institute report, of the 118 biologic medicines that will lose patent protection over the next decade, representing a $234 billion market, only 12 of those products have biosimilars currently in development. This is staggering. Let me be clear. 9 of 10 brand biologic drugs that will lose patent protection over the next 10 years do not have biosimilar competitors in development today. This means fewer savings for Medicare, taxpayers, and employers, but it's not just a business issue. This affects patient care. Real Americans will suffer deeply if we fail to act. Biosimilar competition is stalling due to a series of market dynamics and policy decisions that introduce unacceptable uncertainty and market unpredictability. First, the Inflation Reduction Act was intended to reduce cost, but it unintentionally discourages biosimilar investment due to timing mismatches and an unpredictable price-setting process. Biosimilar development is costly and complex. It takes up to $300 million to complete. Without predictable market conditions, companies simply are not going to be able to risk the investment, and this is going to cost patients critical treatments. Second, as has already been mentioned, many insurers and PBMs are too often favoring higher-priced brand biologics over lower-cost biosimilars, protecting billions in rebates and profits. For example, today there are 22 different price points of biosimilar versions of the brand drug Humira, which at one point was the best-selling drug in history. Some of those biosimilars have price points as much as 87% lower than the brand drug. But biosimilar adoption today is hovering at only about 20% of that market as the brand continues to dominate that market. These practices not only block patient access, but they stifle future competition. Third, as has also been mentioned today, many Medicare reimbursement policies unfairly penalize healthcare providers when they choose to use lower-cost biosimilars, and they can force them to use more costly alternatives. Providers are often reimbursed less than the cost of acquiring biosimilars, which directly undermines the adoption of these lower-cost products. This unpredictable reimbursement imbalance further reduces patient access. On top of these, biosimilars continue to face patent thickets and cumbersome regulatory barriers that slow biosimilar development and prevent timely patient access to these medicines. Congress can act now to reduce the uncertainty that's facing biosimilar adoption through 5 ways. 1, amending the IRA to remove the unpredictability facing biosimilars. 2, ensuring that Medicare beneficiaries have guaranteed access to lower-cost biosimilars first by addressing those PBM practices that block access. 3rd, reform Medicare reimbursement policies to fairly compensate providers who choose lower-cost biosimilar medicines. 4th, support FDA steps to streamline biosimilar approval. And 5th, preventing the use of patent thickets to delay biosimilar competition. The biosimilar market represents not only significant cost savings for taxpayers and employers, up to an additional $189 billion over the next 10 years, but a critical engine for healthcare innovation, competition, and patient choice. We cannot allow biosimilars to stagnate. The cost of inaction is measured not merely in dollars, but in the real suffering of America's patients. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dr. Kesselheim, you are now recognized.
Chairman Buchanan, Ranking Member Doggett, members of the committee, my name is Aaron Kesselheim, and I lead the program on regulation, therapeutics, and law at Harvard Medical School. Biosimilars are an important tool to promote affordability and access for patients to essential biologic drugs. I have some ideas for this committee about how to support the availability of these products, But before I do that, I first want to make sure everyone listening to this hearing understands what is going on right now at Harvard and every other academic medical center in the country because of the short-sighted policies of the current presidential administration. Scientific investigation at these institutions is being absolutely devastated. These cuts involve scientists. The CDC has lost 20% of its staff. They also involve research grants and contracts. Since inauguration, the pace of federal funds awarded by the NIH has fallen to less than half of the amount granted last year. The administration is trying to drastically reduce indirect research funding by nearly $4 billion per year to levels below what institutions require to conduct the scientific investigations necessary for medical progress. Reviews of future grants have been put on hold. Without warning, projects have been tossed aside, wasting years of investment and time, including clinical trials and potentially transformative new therapies that are being delayed and shuttered, pulling the rug out from desperate patients who have nowhere else to turn. This is a crisis of immense proportions because it is universally recognized, at least it seems outside the Trump administration, that government-funded research is the engine of therapeutic innovation, and that the science performed by and funded by the NIH, CDC, and other governmental institutions will lead to the biologics and eventually biosimilars of tomorrow. Government funding has been linked to basically every new drug approved by the FDA, and particularly influential in generating various transformative treatments for cancer, rare diseases, a cure for hepatitis C. Every gene therapy product produced by the FDA had its origins in academic laboratories funded by the NIH, and trials showing the effectiveness of Pratt for HIV were run by the CDC. The pharmaceutical industry relies on government-funded research to do similarly essential product development work, but when fundamental studies are cut or hampered by delay, we are killing the possibility of drugs for the future. We won't see the effects of this next week or next month, but the next generation will look back at this moment and ask us what we were doing while the Trump administration systematically disposed of thousands of research projects that could have helped patients. In addition to the prospect of massive harm to future drug innovation, I also want to point out the more short-term catastrophe that will result when patients cannot access the existing drugs that they do need. Biosimilars can help, but even more important are the continued vitality of the Medicare and Medicaid programs, which provide drug coverage for about 150 million people. Cutbacks planned for the Medicaid program will force states to severely limit their drug coverage, which will inevitably lead to patient deaths. Legislation being considered by this committee to undercut Medicare's drug price negotiation will make drugs less accessible. Practicing doctors across the country, like myself, are extremely worried that patients may not be able to get the drugs that they need. If you do want to identify some potential avenues for policy reform that will bolster the biosimilar market, I recommend empowering the FDA to designate biosimilars as interchangeable with the original biologic and with each other when the evidence indicates that switching studies are not necessary. That type of interchangeability is essential to the effective price competition that we get for generic small molecule drugs, but it lacks for biosimilars and biologics. And that is in part because biologic drugs are more complicated, but science is evolving, the kind of science that is funded by the government in many circumstances, and that type of information can be applied and evolved to try to change the current standards that the FDA uses for reviewing biologics and for reviewing biosimilars to try to make sure they're more available. We need to give the United States Patent and Trademark Office the authority and resources to be more discriminating in reviewing patents to help prevent biosimilar entry, and then ensure that the Patent Office can administratively review already granted patents so that litigation isn't necessary. These patent thickets have been used by brand name manufacturers to prevent the timely entry of biosimilar competition. Access to biosimilars would also be supported by federal actions facilitating the ability of pharmacists to automatically substitute interchangeable products because many state laws limit such substitution. The committee might also consider changes to reimbursement rules, like allowing Medicare Part B to combine biosimilars into a single reimbursement code, or preventing PBMs from offering confidential rebate for biologic drugs once biosimilar versions become available. Medicare price negotiation should also not stop when biosimilars are introduced, since competition and negotiation can work in sync to offer fair price reductions for patients. Thank you.
And thank you. Now we're going to start the questions from the members. Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly thank you to our panel appreciate your taking time, valuable time, I'm sure, to be here to share your expertise and your insights. I am always encouraged to learn more about the developments in healthcare, especially in the pharmaceutical arena, but more specifically biologics, biosimilars, and really the urgency that there is to developing policy so that our citizens across the country and, that there's more access to these technologies. I know that the research and development process to create these innovations is certainly long and expensive, and the complexity certainly speaks for itself. But I'm also encouraged by the leading edge of this innovation. And unlike, as has been pointed out, most traditional small molecule drugs, biologics are derived from the living sources and can contain any number of complex proteins, nucleic acids, or even living cells or tissues. And some are even derived from the recipient's own blood or body tissue. But unfortunately, biologics are one of the most expensive categories of drugs, and I think that's why we need to look more at biosimilars, or in the role of biosimilars in helping people. While the biosimilars are relatively new concepts intended to increase access, we know that cutting-edge therapies that can take place created by biosimilars and the manufacturers of these biosimilars, and that there's a great opportunity here. But I'm concerned that the access just isn't there. I'm told that of the 73 biosimilars that have been approved by the FDA in a rural district like mine, most patients don't have access to those biosimilars. Now, there's a number of reasons, I'm sure, for that. One of those reasons is awareness. And so I find this intriguing that, as the majority of these products have been approved in just the last few years, some providers may simply not be aware of other options that might exist in treating various conditions, but patients might also hesitate to accept a biosimilar alternative they have not heard of before instead of a well-known brand name. So, Mr. Burton, for my question is that for patients with chronic illnesses who depend on biologics to manage their conditions, what concerns do they have perhaps about switching to biosimilars from their biologic prescription, and are patients generally aware of the biosimilars?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think what we've learned in the 10 years that biosimilars have been on the market is that the providers play a critical role in those conversations. So if you're talking about an infused product, the conversation between the physician and also, frankly, the nursing staff with the patient, helping them understand that what they're getting is the same as if they were getting the brand biologic. If you're talking about a pharmacy dispensed biosimilar, again, the role of that pharmacist in helping a patient understand what it is that they're getting and that they can expect the same clinical outcomes is really critical. And I think the FDA has done a lot to educate on that. I think we've come a long way in 10 years. Undoubtedly, there's more that can be done in that area, though.
Appreciate that. Dr. Pratt, would you say your conversations with patients that you have, do they discuss the safety and efficacy of biosimilars and their potential cost savings? And have you seen that as productive in your conversations?
Certainly. I think that this is a conversation that's evolved over time in the last decade since we've seen biosimilars. I think that skepticism about their efficacy and safety was greater 10 years ago than it is today. There are some patients, I think, that you really need to talk them through it and educate them quite a bit. I'll give an example. If I have a patient with metastatic breast cancer and brain metastasis that's had stable disease for 10 years, any drug switch is going to create a fair bit of trepidation, and I have to do a good amount of education to make sure that they're comfortable with the switch, really to a product that is biologically the same and chemically slightly different. And so I think to my colleague's point, there's a real role in education for those patients, but that's gotten much easier over time. And now, as I have these conversations with patients every day in practice, my education around this is quite minimal because I just set this as the expectation of the drug that they'll receive.
Very well. Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Doggett, you're recognized.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate each of you coming. Certainly, Dr. Patton, good to see you from home. I think there may be difference on how you achieve it, but all the witnesses have spoken to the value of competition in trying to bring down drug prices some. Dr. Kesselheim, of course, I'm pleased that you focused on the devastation that is occurring as a result of the slash and burn approach to research and often rejection of science. While we certainly want to encourage manufacturers, private research and development, I wonder if you could explain a little more about the differences between research that's conducted by manufacturers who purely have a profit incentive and the research that is funded by taxpayers who have a strong interest in public health.
Sure. The funding that comes from the NIH and other government sources tends to fund the basic and translational science work that is the foundation of all innovation, because it helps us discover the origins of disease, the biologic and genetic origins of disease, and the targets in which to identify. And this is extremely risky research that for-profit companies tend not to be involved in. But once a useful mechanism or a useful process or a useful pathway is discovered, then for-profit companies, once a lot of the risk is taken away, can look through the drugs and the library of molecules that they have on hand, or use their expertise in synthesis and manufacturing to create products then that can address those issues. So I think that the kind of funding that we're seeing cut that is really going to destroy innovation is the kind of fundamental research that we depend on for trying to understand disease and trying to come up with the cures of tomorrow for diseases that don't have sufficient treatments right now.
And I believe there are a number of studies that have estimated for every dollar we invest in this research, we get far greater returns, $5, $6 per dollar invested.
Absolutely, and the important thing is to remember that if the government doesn't invest in this kind of research, then nobody will be investing in this kind of research. It just simply won't get done. And the kinds of discoveries that we've enjoyed over the past couple decades because of this great partnership between government funding and the subsequent product development and manufacturing work that goes on in the pharmaceutical industry just won't emerge.
Would you outline your concerns about a number of proposals that are pending to create more carve-outs and delays in our new drug negotiation process?
Sure. So, I mean, once we get important new drugs, drugs don't work if patients can't take them, and patients won't take them if the prices are too high. We know that there are a lot of studies about cost-related non-adherence, and the Inflation Reduction Act took a first step in the direction of trying to get to fair prices for certain high-priced drugs that have been on the market for a really long period of time, and this was an important step in trying to make drugs more fairly accessible. And so the idea of some of the bills that have been considered in this committee to exclude more drugs and delay negotiation further from what was set up in the IRA just doesn't make any sense at all. All of the drugs that are subject to negotiation in the IRA have made tens of billions of dollars, far more than any reasonable estimate of their investment before they get to the point of negotiation. And so the idea of trying to build more carve-outs just takes money from excessively priced drugs away from patients and payers that they can use to try to get access to the drugs that they need.
What recommendations do you have for improving the negotiation process?
Well, I think that the negotiation process worked well in its first year. It is continuing apace. I think that actually it would be reasonable to think about whether we should negotiate the prices for drugs sooner than what we are currently do, because again, we are negotiating the prices based on the benefits that these drugs provide. So a drug company that has a new drug that provides a substantial amount of benefits is going to get a substantial price for their product. This is not paying bare bones prices for products. This is paying reasonable prices aligned with the benefits that these products provide, with the knowledge in hand about how much these drugs cost to develop. So drug companies that believe in their product and that have good products that meet unmet medical need for patients should not be worried about the prospect of negotiation, and shouldn't be worried about the prospect of negotiation earlier in the process, so that we can achieve a fair price for patients and a fair return for companies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kelly, you recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, thank you all for taking time out of your lives to come and talk to us. Mr. Burton, your testimony mentions that 860,000 Medicare patients with diabetes rely on biologics for treatment. Now, I'm a type 2 diabetic, and so I share your concern that biosimilar development in this space is limited. From your perspective, what are the current disincentives the government has put in place that limit or prohibit development of new life-saving drugs?
So, excuse me. So I think as you think about the incentives, you have to think about the ecosystem for what's going to bring a product to market. So you need to think about the development process. Is that development process working as quickly and efficiently and predictably as possible? Today, no. FDA's improved, but there's more that can be done to streamline that process. You need to make sure these products can get to market. Folks have mentioned patent thickets. Humira is a great example. 100+ patents on that branded product. That's going to be challenging for a biosimilar to overcome through patent litigation. So looking at patent reform to address the use of patent thickets. And then looking at predictability for adoption. You talked about diabetes. If we look at the first biosimilar insulin, had prices about 60% less than the brand product. We did some analysis of this about 2 years ago. And in the time window we looked at, about 60% of the prescriptions that were written for that type of insulin were written for the biosimilar. But the biosimilars were only filled about 30 to 40% of the time, because the PBMs were blocking those claims and pushing those claims over to the branded product. So you have to have that predictability and that clarity that when there's a lower cost biosimilar on the market, it should be the assumption that that's what a patient is getting first.
Thank you. I'm going to yield the rest of my time to Dr. Murphy, because he's in this business every day, and it is truly a business. I know it's about keeping people healthy and keeping people to be productive, but I'm going to cede to Dr. Murphy because he does this every day of his life. Doctor.
Thank you, sir. I had a great, talking about NIH funding, I had a great discussion with Jay Bhattacharya this Sunday and about NIH funding specifically. And sadly enough, this is how politics have poisoned medicine. The acting director of the NIH, before Jay came in, decided, as he was a Fauci acolyte, decided he would poison all of the funding streams now and applications, such that they're now 2 months behind. Thankfully, we're going to try to get these backed up by his standards up to May, but that's the #1 reason, Dr. Kesselheim, that funding from NIH has not been done. And by the way, Harvard has, last time I checked, a $52 billion endowment. So if there are any shortfalls in funding, rather than being a real estate company, Harvard might look to about funding their own research. That said, I'd like to talk about the other issues that are going on today. I think everybody has highlighted the #1 problem here, and that's the middlemen is now destroying American medicine. PBMs, 340B, so many of the other programs have gotten in charge of all of this. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened with the IRA in reality. In some drugs, it costs $2 billion to bring a drug to market. Now, with the 913 rule, we've had 49 research programs, talk about research stopping, 49 research programs and 24 drugs have been discontinued because of the passage of the IRA. 78% expect to cancel early-stage pipeline projects because the small molecule drugs are not funded long enough to be able to reach their runway for drugs. This is what's happened since the IRA has come into effect. 70% of small molecule funding has gone away, whereas opposed to biologics have received 10 times more funding, meaning that they get 13 years to recoup their losses. The small molecule drugs, the pills, those things that people can take at home, which given in a rural community, people would absolutely prefer rather than driving 2 hours to a hospital and getting then a 2-hour infusion, this is what we should be funding. And I think, and hopefully it was not done nefariously by anybody who crafting the IRA, but this is one of the side effects that has happened about this. I'm going to give one good example about why the IRA was bad, because you can't do other indications for drug. Keytruda, which has absolutely changed the oncological world, was first started out, in my best recollection, as a drug for metastatic melanoma. It now has over 41 approved indications for so many other different types of cancers. If the IRA were in effect when Keytruda came out, we would have none of these, because there would not be allowed to be an investment in any of the other indications. So I want to talk a little bit more when it is back to my time, but the IRA, while helping try to drug costs, was so poorly designed, it's actually killed American medicine. Yield back.
Mr. Thompson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and Dr. Edgerton, thank you in addition for your military service, serving in the best branch of the United States military. I'm struck by the fact that we're having this hearing about the health of biosimilars market when this administration and our House majority colleagues continue to take steps to undermine both biosimilars as well as all health care. The one very good example of that is the threat of tariffs coming out of the White House on the pharmaceutical industry. And I want to submit for the record, Mr. Chairman, both a newspaper article talking about it and the testimony of the president that he gave in February at a signing ceremony at the White House, where he says that he wants to increase tariffs on pharmaceuticals up to 25% or higher. The administration had just eliminated 3,500 FDA employees last week. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter for the record the article on that. Thank you. The administration announced cuts of $4 billion a year to NIH research. We've also heard today how that is harming things. And it's not just NIH. I've got a research institution in my district, one of the universities of California, who's doing just incredibly important research on Alzheimer's, on cancer, on spina bifida. All of these institutions are the recipient of these draconian cuts that harm the people that we were elected to serve. So how are you supposed to find innovative treatments and cures while undermining our research institution? And to make it even worse, our majority colleagues are trying to do this because they want to increase tax cuts for the richest people in the country. How are you supposed to get a prescription for a biosimilar or for anything else, in that matter, if you don't have health care coverage to go see your doctor? This week, the majority is planning to vote to give the Musk-rich likes a big tax cut while taking away health insurance from hardworking Americans. But make no mistake, these cuts to Medicaid are going to hurt every American. And 1 in 3 people in California rely on Medicaid, but the fact is 3 out of 3 people in California will be affected by it. I've heard from healthcare providers throughout my district that if these cuts come to fruition, what's going to happen is, at worst, they're going to close hospitals. At best, they're going to cut and restrict services. So it doesn't matter where you get your health care. If you go to a hospital and the services have been cut, doctors have been fired, you're out of luck. It is going to be devastating for all of our districts across the country. There's already a shortage for health care providers, and this just exacerbates that. Dr. Kesselheim, I'd like to ask you, can you explain, if we cut Medicaid funding, as has been proposed, what would the impact to patients' ability to access care, including biosimilars, if that we're discussing here today?
I think it would be completely devastating for patients' abilities to access drugs if we make the kind of cuts to Medicaid funding that have been discussed in Washington, because Medicaid budgets operate on fixed Medicaid state budgets operate on fixed budgets, and if they're cut, then they're going to have to cut services, and one of the first services that they're going to have to cut are going to be the provision of coverage for prescription drugs. And if people with low incomes are no longer provided with Medicaid coverage to be able to afford their prescription drugs, they're not going to be able to get the essential medications and biosimilar medications that they need.
Thank you very much. I heard from healthcare providers and recipients throughout my district. I heard from a woman who Medicaid pays for her wheelchair. That is the reason why she's not homebound or institution bound, in which case it would cost a lot more than the cost of a wheelchair. I heard from one hospital who said government payers make up 70% of our revenue. Without it, we'll have to slash services for everyone in our community. And from a provider who said without insurance, people don't get the preventive care that they need, and they end up with more serious conditions that are far more expensive. And from a mental health care worker who said mental health services keep patients at home and contributing to our community. If those services get cut, more people will go without care and end up in our criminal justice system. This is serious stuff, and these are the things that we should be talking about. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Dr. Murphy, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to get us back on topic if we can. Just a few minutes ago, I just talked about the middlemen. The insurance lobby is the greatest lobby in this town. It's disgusting, to be very honest with you, of what's going on. I wonder if, Dr. Pratt, can you talk a little bit, expand about the abuses about the 340B program? Because I want to hit, if we can, I want to hit the 340B program, I want to go back to the IRA, and I want to hit PBMs, and then I want to ask Mr. Burton about Humira. So let's just try to do that real quick.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy, for your opportunity to answer this question. The 340B program, as you know, started by the Public Health Services Act with the intent of, spreading limited resources to serve vulnerable patient populations, but that service is not written in statute. It's not enforceable, and so what we see is a tremendous arbitrage opportunity for disproportionate share hospitals that participate to buy low and sell high, creating financial incentives for purchasing originator products at a higher cost because that gap is much higher. And you talked about pembrolizumab, Keytruda. Big fan of Keytruda. I was a national principal investigator for the trial that got it approved to treat breast cancer. There is a 340B entity that is reimbursed by commercial payers at 600% of ASP that purchases that drug at a discount.
So in other words, with the 340B program is picking winners and losers.
Yes.
Because it's definitely pushing universities or bigger practices, hospitals, et cetera, over private practices, which is, in my opinion, much more of an efficient delivery of care. But thank you. Mr. Burton, can you talk a little bit about, you were saying about Humira. Why is it that you are not able really to prescribe the biologics compared to Humira in a private setting?
Sure. So I think that what we hear is not an unwillingness to prescribe, it's an unwillingness to cover. So if you look back at Humira, in the first about 15 months of the biosimilars being on the market, again, with prices at 80% lower list price, the market share after 1 year was at about 2%. For all biosimilar share of the Humira market. And the reason is because the big three PBMs were not touching it. Right. At best, they were covering it at parity, but parity doesn't give a patient...
Why were they not touching it? Because they couldn't make money on it.
It was about the rebates and the fees that they could get on the branded product.
Right.
What we actually saw, if you peel away the data, you actually, in the time the biosimilars have been on the market, you've seen more patients switched to the newer higher cost brand products, product hopped, then switched to biosimilars.
Because PBMs get reimbursed as a percentage of the drug cost.
And because those rebates are often bundled on all three of those products, rather than comparing the product at the unit level cost, where biosimilars are consistently lower price, whether you're looking at the high price, high rebate, or the discounted option.
Well, we have great legislation. It is bipartisan, bicameral to be able to try to fix the PBM conundrum here. Again, started out as a good idea, just like MA plans started out as a good idea, but insurance companies come in and they abuse the privilege of helping us provide care to the American patient, and that needs to be stopped. So thank you. Dr. Edgerton, can you explain to the committee what it means, the buy and bill part? Because I don't think, I understand it, obviously, I ran a practice, but I don't think the committee folks could do that. Can you understand what that means?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'd be happy to. So the buy and bill is when a medication is administered in the office setting. The office has to acquire the medication, administer it to the patient, and then be reimbursed for it. So the buying the medication and then billing after the fact. And because of that, the practice takes on a substantial risk in acquiring the medication and then having to negotiate the reimbursement. The ASP system previously had worked extremely well in controlling those costs because any concession that was made by a manufacturer to any other entity in the process of selling their medication, whether it was a rebate or a price reduction, within a couple of quarters would be included in the reimbursement dictated by ASP. So that typically brought drug costs down and in a very effective way, and that's Part B, again, buy and bill is Part B, compared to the pharmacy benefit called Part D. What you saw in Part D, for example, with Humira, is the cost of that medication doubling over time, whereas in Part B, which is the buy and bill side, a similar medicine in the same class called a TNF biologic had a consistent reduction in cost over time.
Right, so what we're saying, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to wrap up here, is basically kind of a whack-a-mole approach of what we're happening. You know, I think everybody on this entire dais wants to bring drug costs down, absolutely. But we also at the same time want innovation, we want new cures, we want to be able to do the things. Look at oncology compared to 15 years ago is light years ahead. But if we stop the progress, boom, that's dead. And so, again, thank you all for coming. Appreciate your expertise. I'll yield back.
Ms. Chu, you recognize.
Dr. Kesselheim, today's hearing is about expanding access to life-saving medicines. Well, for decades, the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, has brought life-saving treatments to millions of Americans suffering from some of the deadliest diseases. Yet every single Republican is standing idly by as President Trump and Elon Musk terminate hundreds of NIH grants for scientific research, attacking the very heart of pharmaceutical innovation in this country. And the consequences are being felt across the country. Recently, I heard from my constituent, Dr. Kelly Kwan, about how Trump's cuts to NIH funding effectively put an end to her research. She's a pediatric surgeon and an NIH-funded researcher who is conducting studies on the effects of prescription opioids on critically ill infants. And it's about understanding the relationship between genetics, opioid use, and brain development in critically ill infants so that we can know how we could have safer treatments for our most vulnerable patients. However, she was informed last month that the study section scheduled to review and score her grant was abruptly canceled with no immediate timeline for scheduling. In other words, it just wipes out the grant. So Dr. Kesselheim, what impacts will mass terminations of scientific research grants like Dr. Kelly Kwan's have on American innovation, and how will these cuts impact patients' ability to access and afford life-saving medicines?
Yeah, I think these are great examples of very devastating cuts that you're talking about. The NIH's budget, everybody, is about $60 billion per year. That's per year. So this funds essential research into basic and translational science. It also funds later stage research into product development, proof of concept testing, even clinical testing that have been essential in bringing some of the most transformative drugs that we have for all kinds of diseases: cancer, eye disease, rheumatologic disease, every field of medicine you can name. has key life-saving therapies that owe their origins to funding made by NIH. The concept that that could be replaced by funding from individual institutions is just not available, just because of the massive scale and the amount of such great outcomes that we've gotten from that investment.
Thank you for that. Now, last week, we saw President Trump, Elon Musk, and HHS Secretary Kennedy fire 10,000 dedicated people at the Department of Health and Human Services just for doing their jobs. Lines at HHS buildings wrapped around the block as hundreds of workers showed up, only to learn that they were fired when their badges didn't open the door. Others woke up to an email at 5 a.m. telling them they were out of a job after years or even decades of service. So, Dr. Kesselheim, these mass firings include roughly 3,500 employees at the Food and Drug Administration. How will these sweeping cuts impact the FDA's ability to approve new biosimilars and ensure their safety?
I mean, the work that the FDA does, not only in reviewing the specific details of individual applications, but also in keeping abreast of scientific information to try to understand what is safe in terms of generating approvals, and what kinds of studies that biosimilars can do in order to give good advice to the biosimilar manufacturers. All that work is essential, and I think that a lot of the witnesses here today have talked about the importance to biosimilars of streamlining the FDA process and of getting a very thoughtful FDA process in place to be able to get biosimilars approved. We can't have that without experts at the FDA who feel secure in their jobs, who are appropriately compensated for their expertise, and just to have enough staff to actually do the essential work that the FDA does. All of that is at risk because of the current policies and the firings right now that are going on, both at the FDA, and then you mentioned the other institutions as well. The NIH doesn't just fund science; it also does science, and it stays abreast of the science. And if there are people that are fired indiscriminately from NIH and CDC, then that makes it harder for those organizations to do the work that they need to do internally, as well as give out the funds that they need to give out to the scientists around the world, around the country.
And Dr. Kesselheim, I appreciate the fact that you highlighted how the Inflation Reduction Act, which passed without a single Republican vote, is working to bring down drug prices for millions of seniors. My constituent, who used to pay $1,500 annually for insulin now pays only $35 a month. And thank you for mentioning that. And I yield back.
Mr. Hearn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Biosimilars offer increased choice for patients and lower costs for the individual and healthcare system as a whole. Biosimilars are a prime example of innovation in the United States healthcare system. These drugs require a complex manufacturing process and lengthy approval process, but with nearly 70 of these products being approved by the FDA within the last decade, it just goes to show the value seen in developing these treatments. These drugs offer patients a lower cost option and create competition within the drug market. The numbers speak for themselves. Since the first biosimilar was approved in 2015, it is estimated that biosimilars have saved the U.S. healthcare system $23.6 billion and led to an average 25% decrease in biologic prices. Congress should do everything we can to support this type of innovation. Unfortunately, like too many other things, unintended consequences from lawmaking have negatively affected the biosimilar and generic market. As we've heard today, Medicare reimbursement models are hurting utilization of biosimilars, something we as Congress should examine and address. In my opinion, something that is even more harmful to the biosimilar and generic market is the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. We've already seen effects of the IRA in the small molecule market with uncertainty due to price setting halting the development of new treatments. I'm extremely concerned that in the near future, biosimilars will follow suit. The IRA has weakened incentives for manufacturers to go through the arduous process of bringing a biosimilar to market. Without these incentives, patients will not have access to these lower cost drugs, and the U.S. drug market will lose the competitiveness we have been trying to promote. Mr. Burton, what impact do you expect Medicare price settings to have on future investment and development of biosimilars, and what specific barriers do you see for companies trying to bring a biosimilar to market?
Thank you for the question. You mentioned incentives. I'd say predictability. The issue is predictability. Let me put it this way. We believe biosimilars are going to generate greater savings than price negotiation. I think that's borne out if we look at what's out there today, where Stelara, through price negotiation, landed at, I believe, a 66% discount compared to list price. Today, there are five or six biosimilar versions of Stelara at an 80% discount, and we're all of 3 months into that market beginning. So we think biosimilars are going to deliver greater savings. The issue, though, is predictability. What kind of market are you entering? So let me put it this way. If you're thinking about a $300 million investment today that is going to, where you're going to come to market 10 years from now, you want to be able to predict what that market's going to look like. And there's a big difference if you're looking at a market that is $1 billion in annual sales versus a market that is, say, $400 million in annual sales. And because of, biosimilars are already dealing with a number of areas of uncertainty when they go into this. But the price negotiation process laid out in IRA provides zero guidance as to what that price will be. So you have to assume that a product is going to be negotiated, but you have no way of predicting what that price will be. And it's a big difference if you're, again, looking at a price cut from, say, $1 billion to $800 million or $1 billion to $400 million. That's going to affect your investment.
Thank you. A 2021 report from the National Organization of Rare Diseases found that 25% of the 552 orphan drugs and biologics on the market are approved for more than one rare disease, thanks to additional uses discovered after initial approval. Under the IRA, companies have no incentive to explore these additional uses because their risk price setting once an additional orphan designation is granted. Dr. Pratt, are you concerned that this incentive could hurt progress for the 95% of rare diseases and rare cancers that are still without treatments? And then, if I could, while you're answering that, would excluding the orphan drugs from the drug pricing negotiation program, as the Orphan Cures Act does, help provide certainty in this market and create incentives for manufacturers to look for additional indications of a molecule?
I do think that there is a risk for follow-on indications when you have a drug developed. I think a great example of that is Keytruda or pembrolizumab that Dr. Murphy spoke about before. Originally, approved, I think it was in 2014 for the treatment of metastatic melanoma. Subsequently, kidney cancer. I think it has actually 14 different cancer indications now, and now we see immunotherapy approved across, I think, 28 different indications. So, we all know the story of Jimmy Carter and his wonderful response to pembrolizumab, and we know that story. But I'll tell you, my own husband is a cancer survivor of 8 years of metastatic kidney cancer because of pembrolizumab, so thank God they had investments and continued approval. Again, I served as a principal investigator to bring it to breast cancer. Those additional follow-on indications become less likely if there is less incentive in the future. And so I do think that orphan drugs require special attention. I do think attention to a carve-out would provide incentives for development to continue. I worry without those incentives, it's hard for people to invest in that research and development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to the witnesses for being here.
I was going to go at the end, but I wanted to ask, because I don't want to lose everybody. I want to get your thoughts. A little off subject, but something I'm interested in. Most of you have heard of Senator Bill Frist. We had him as a witness earlier in the year. He's a heart surgeon out of Tennessee, but I think he was also one of the leaders, big leaders in terms of the Senate. His philosophy now has changed quite a bit, where he's a lot more about food as medicine. That a lot of the prescriptions that he wrote, tens of thousands, never wrote a prescription for food, was just for drugs. He looks back on it, there should have been a lot more in terms of nutritional food. You got, children at 20% obesity, adults at 40% obesity, and these numbers, and everything seems to be going the wrong direction, even though we're spending $4.4 trillion on healthcare, and you can look around the world where our results are not that great. And here we are talking about drugs and other things. Not to say they don't do a lot of great things. I got to take a few of them myself. But my point is, what is your thought about, any of you, if you want to just pipe in a little bit, in terms of the idea of food as medicine, meaning that we need more nutritional food. A lot of the stuff that people eat, it's nobody's fault, but a lot of it's garbage. So just my opinion. But Dr. Pat?
Thank you. I think that, as Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think that whether it's cancer screening or having a healthy diet and exercise, we can't underestimate the value of these initiatives in preventing chronic disease. It's critically important. I do think modern medicine has maybe not emphasized that as much as one should, though I will say pertinent, this hearing certainly does not take the place of the need for the development of innovative therapies. But I think that all of those things are critically important. Again, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. We need to be making sure we're educating our patients on the right steps to prevent disease.
Well, a lot of people feel, or some people I should say feel, that we'd have a lot less cancer, a lot less heart disease if people had a better nutritional diet, or from that standpoint.
We see actually that cancer among young adults, so those less than 50, is increasing at a rate of about 1% to 2% per year right now. While we don't know all of the causes, we suspect a lot of that is because of diet and sedentary lifestyle. So I think that the best evidence supports that we need to be emphasizing prevention quite a bit more. Though again, that's not to say that we don't need to continue to invest in innovative therapies.
I'm not saying that,
Yes,
but I
I know.
think that, when you look at our numbers are off, the type 2 diabetics are off the charts.
Yes.
And so, and I think, and I look at one of the things, I've got 10 grandkids, 10 and under, and I just think about the idea that a lot of kids today, their obesity rates are 20%. It used to be 3 or 4%. So there's a lot more we could do. Anybody else want to weigh in, Doctor?
I'd be happy to comment on that. I completely agree. I think that the lifestyle issues,
That's what I'm talking about.
where we can intervene and help to prevent some of these diseases are critical. And I think that focus is growing. There certainly is a lot of interest among patients in rheumatology coming and asking about things like anti-inflammatory diets, are there different foods they can eat to prevent their gout, things like that. So I'm glad that we're seeing that interest and that we can, as we've said, merge that with the pharmaceutical and other treatments that we have available and really try to keep our population more healthy.
Mr. Burton, you have anything you want to add?
I'll defer to the doctors on this panel.
Okay, Doc?
I just want to add, I think I agree with everything that's been said thus far about needing both healthy access to food and healthy nutrition, and as well as drugs, because there are some diseases that patients can't control that they still are afflicted with, that we need to help them with. But I also want to point out that it isn't just necessarily on patients and their lifestyle, but also on the circumstances in which patients live. There are places that are underserved by with their ability to obtain access to healthy food, and there are corporations in the sugar industry and in the agriculture industry that benefit from selling unsafe products to patients that patients don't even realize that they're consuming, that contribute to this as well. And that's why we need the sort of social supports that are necessary to provide patients with access to healthy
I'm going to close
foods.
on this one point, with just my own experience. You go through life, especially in the 40s and 50s, and your weight's up and down. You got to kind of, it seems like you take your mind off that, then you're all 10, 15 pounds heavier. One book that I read changed my life permanently, and it had an equation in there. At the top of the equation was the nutritional value of the food. The bottom of the equation was calories. What is the most nutritional food with the fewest calories? And you go down that lane, you make better choices. Of course, all the greeny, leafy greens and all that are in there, but you make better choices. And, I dropped 30 pounds, and that was 20 years ago, never looked back. And I'm not bragging on myself, it's not about that, but I am concerned about where we're going as a country. We're spending $4.4 trillion, 20% of the economy, and you can make the argument we're getting sicker. So something's got to change, and it's not anybody's fault per se, because a lot of the food that's prepackaged food out there, there's no nutritional value in that food. That's just my own opinion. Thank you. I appreciate all of you guys, and we'll go over to Mr. Evans.
Dr. Kesselheim, some of the key traits made Philadelphia a leader in drug development on these research institutions. our strong biologic medical section of development and the quality of researchers in our higher education institute produce. Can you point out specific action that the Trump administration has taken to weaken drug research and development in the U.S. and Philadelphia?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the reduction in funding for research in this area has been astounding. There's been a reduction in the giving out of grants that were already provided, that were just stopped. You want to talk about waste? That's an enormous waste of all the time that already went into that product into that grant and into that line of research to just be stopped. There's people that have been let go, and there have been Alzheimer's disease research centers, for example, have been shuttered because of lack of funding over the last couple of months and stopping of lines of research. And this is happening in settings all around the country, and we need to be extremely concerned about the effect of that on our ability to develop the next generation of cures.
Dr. Burton, Peter Marks was a leader in FDA oversight on this area of research and development. He was recently pushed out by the Trump administration. Mr. Burton can also elaborate on how the lack of strong scientific leadership made this harmful to private sector research firms and drug manufacturers and general drugs to patients.
Thank you for the question. So certainly we have a number of questions and concerns about some of the changes that have happened over there. On the one hand, we're glad that reviewers are still in place, but there are a lot of roles that support those reviews that allow those to occur efficiently that may not be there and may slow that. So we're carefully paying attention and concerned about any changes that could undermine the FDA's review process and the predictability of that review process.
Drexel University Department of Pharmaceutical has reduced the number of graduate students they have admitted because of Trump's reckless action with HIA. Dr. Kessler again, can you please elaborate on what Trump's interruption in research funding for the long-term development of drugs in the city of Philadelphia and the U.S.?
Of course. I mean, I think it's really a tragedy right now to look at the state of play. If you were a new researcher coming out of your PhD program, or even considering whether to do a PhD program, there was a survey done in the journal Nature of over 1,600 scientists that found that in the last couple of months, as a result of the changes in the environment, many of them are looking for work in Europe and Canada to try to figure out if they can continue doing the research, the essential research they want to do outside the United States. I think the impact of these kinds of indiscriminate firings and cuttings on the workforce and people's interest in pursuing science and interest in staying in doing these essential work that they're doing in academic research settings like Drexel or many other places around the country is another really important part of this. This isn't just about the work itself, but also about the investment in people and the investment in the resources who develop the ideas that are ultimately going to be the ones that serve as the basis for future treatments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan and Ranking Member Doggett, and thank you all for being here today. The majority of my work in the healthcare space is really focusing on ensuring robust patient access to care, particularly for rural patients. I'm from West Virginia. In my district, the median household income is $52,742, which makes my district one of the most financially constrained in the country. 1.2 million people in West Virginia have at least one chronic disease. In a state of only 1.7 million people, That means that most West Virginians are on a tight budget already. Therefore, they also have to consider the potential high cost of managing their health. Biosimilars seem to be a great option that can help reduce patient costs, but it appears from your testimonies that we have some work to do, making sure that the patients and the providers are educated on biosimilar options, and the insurers are putting these drugs onto their formularies. Dr. Pratt, sometimes it seems the determining factor in a patient getting access to certain therapies is the physician's awareness that the therapies exist. Is there a new biologic on the market that can save a patient money, but a physician doesn't know about it or doesn't really know how to explain it to their patients, so they don't recommend it? With growing patient and physician awareness of these biosimilars, have more patients been asking to switch? And if not, do you believe patient awareness of lower cost alternatives would incentivize them to ask to switch?
It's a great question. I do think that there is an educational opportunity, though I think that there is the medical community is well versed in comparison to a decade ago regarding biosimilars. And I'd mentioned earlier, but I think actually that conversation has gotten a lot easier, though there are other barriers that we face. So for example, if I have a patient that's on trastuzumab or Herceptin to treat metastatic breast cancer, and I talk to them about switching to a biosimilar product and I write for one, frequently the insurance company will prioritize, the pharmacy benefit manager will prioritize a specific biosimilar that we're underwater on, meaning that our costs exceed our reimbursement. That doesn't, we're not able to pick that choice because of viability. So yes, I think there's a role in education, but there are other barriers that I think lead to suboptimal utilization.
So between the patient and the insurance company, there needs to be better communication. Dr. Edgerton, what are the most common questions patients ask when considering switching to a biosimilar? Is cost the driving factor?
Typically, patients are most interested in the potential side effects of the drug. Is it going to be the same as what they've been on? And the efficacy. For our patients in rheumatology, these patients are typically on a biologic agent for many years, if not their entire life. So there can be consternation if they're on one particular agent and they're considering switching or their insurance plan is mandating a switch. So those are generally the topics of conversation. When it comes to price, interestingly, I haven't heard as much from patients. I don't think potentially there's the understanding of how access can improve as these costs come down. And that is something I enjoy opening that conversation with them and in explaining that. But as we've said, a lot of that opportunity has been squandered because the formulary construction is not allowing patients access to the biosimilars. And when the biosimilars are favored on a formulary, the economics now are upside down because, as Dr. Pratt had mentioned, with backdoor rebates moving from the manufacturer to the pharmacy benefit manager, now the cost of the drug is actually higher than the reimbursement. So it's a very strange situation.
Thank you. Price competition is very important for patients, especially for the rural patients, such in my district. The Inflation Reduction Act included a potential pause in price setting for certain biosimilars, but the process is complicated and may not provide the predictability needed for biologic and biosimilar development. Mr. Burton, can you speak on how important clear and consistent lawmaking is for the development of a strong biosimilar marketplace?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So again, for a biosimilar manufacturer, if you're thinking about investing $300 million in a new lower cost product, you need predictability. You need to know that that market's going to be there 10 years from now when you actually get to the end of that race. That means you need to know you need to be able to guess what the market size is going to look like. It also means you need to know you're going to get adoption. So not only do biosimilars face all the issues we've discussed today, But the IRA puts in place what I think was a well-intended approach that will harm biosimilar adoption.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have to yield back my time.
No worries.
Mr. Fitzpatrick, you recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan, for holding this timely hearing. Thank you to our witnesses for being here on this really, really important topic, particularly when it comes to lowering costs for patients while improving patient care. Specific to cancer treatment, which is a continually evolving space, it's important that we discuss and educate on the utilization of biosimilars. My colleagues, Representative Miller just raised, compared to biologics in the cancer space. Dr. Pratt, in your testimony, you discuss how you've utilized biosimilar drugs every day in your practice for your cancer patients. Can you speak to the benefit of biosimilars specifically in the oncology space?
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. So it offers the ability, really biosimilars are bio-same. Biologically, they're similar with subtle chemical differences. And so really it offers the ability to provide effective cancer therapy at a lower cost. So I will say it's critical to our mission to provide high-value cancer care, and that allows us to be more effective at that mission for the patients we serve.
And when treating cancer patients with biosimilars, do patients ever share concerns about the quality of this treatment versus any alternatives?
Sometimes they do, and I think as their doctor, it's our role to be educators to make sure that their questions are answered and they feel comfortable with their path forward. But it's been interesting to see this evolve over the last decade. 10 years ago, this was quite controversial, and I would say today, seldom do I get real pushback and questions regarding prescribing the more affordable, biologically same biosimilar drug.
Thank you, Dr. Pratt. Mr. Burton, moving on to the topic of patient affordability, especially and how biosimilars can reduce out-of-pocket costs for patients. Particularly in the Medicare Part B space, there are instances of providers being discouraged from prescribing biosimilars that have been proven to be effective. Mr. Burton, in your experiences, particularly with building relationships with various patient advocacy groups and advocating for patient-centered reform, how can the Medicare Part B system be improved to address these instances among providers and potentially incentivize the utilization of biosimilars that have already been proven effective?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen is that Medicare payment policy can really encourage appropriate choices. So if you look at adoption of biosimilars to date, some of the work we did showed that providers who are participating in things like the oncology care model, on things like ACOs, were more likely to use biosimilars. These are payment settings where they're rewarded for using lower cost products. I think the challenge that's been described here is that right now you have an ASP based reimbursement model that was built for brands. And we're trying to shoehorn biosimilars into it in a way that actually can penalize providers, can leave providers underwater. So I think you need to look at things like the calculation of ASP, whether rebates should still be a part of that when you're talking about biosimilars. Look at the add-on payment. Look at things like shared savings demonstration where providers receive a share of the savings that would otherwise accrue to Medicare when they use a lower cost product. These are examples of some policies that I think the committee could consider.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. Thank you, Dr. Pratt. Thank you to all of our panelists for your time today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Davis, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank all of our witnesses. Today's hearing is supposed to be about the prospect of biosimilar products as an opportunity for patients to purchase medications at a lower price. What are biosimilars? Well, they are similar versions of the Food and Drug Administration's approved biologic drugs that use the same manufactured technology and processes as the original biologic, but may have minor differences in their manufacturing process that offers patients lower prices for certain drugs. Unfortunately, it seemed to me that many Republicans want to divert, confuse, and bamboozle the American people into thinking that they have their best interest at heart, and they really want this to happen. What a contradiction. It is the Food and Drug Administration that regulates, reviews, and establishes guidelines for these products to be developed and marketed to consumers. How can the Food and Drug Administration continue to implement plans on biosimilars and other drugs and medical devices when President Trump just fired 3,500 employees last week? That included scientists, researchers, technical assistants that advise and assist pharmaceutical manufacturers in following safe and regulatory procedures on behalf of the American public and the world. And what about the 1,300 employees of the National Institutes of Health who were fired for no logical reason? And the pausing and a cancellation of billions of dollars of research grants to help prevent, treat, and cure the many current and future diseases that affect people in our country and throughout the world. Total silence seemed to be the path that many Republicans have taken, and some have embraced the president's effort to destroy the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institute of Health's scientific infrastructure and the efficiency of these institutions. In my state of Illinois, President Trump is planning to slash up to $240.7 million in NIH funding. NIH funds the University of Chicago and Rush University to operate the Illinois Institute of Translational Medicine, a partnership with Advocate Aurora Health, Illinois Tech, Loyola University, University of Chicago, and Endeavor Health. This collection reaches 9.5 million people and is designed to reduce the time it takes to develop and share new treatment and health approaches. Researchers at Northwestern University are using NIH funding to identify the first compound that eliminates the ongoing degeneration of certain neurons. If all of this is taken away, Dr. Kesselheim, could we expect corporations or corporate America to fund these stages of research?
Definitely not. And I also just want to bring up a very important point that you made about the cuts to the NIH as it relates to biosimilars. There's been a lot of talk today about the small differences between biosimilars and original biologic drugs. But because these are very large, complex molecules, unlike with small molecules, those small differences can really make big impacts on the efficacy and safety of these drugs. And while for some biologics we know that those small differences are safe, for other biologics or for newer biosimilars, we might not know that. And that's why the role of the FDA in trying to understand when it is that we can safely approve biosimilars and when it is that biosimilars need more testing to ensure that they're safe and effective so that patients can rely on them are critically important. And we cannot be undermining the work of the FDA in doing that kind of essential work and in helping guide corporations and companies in doing that kind of essential work.
Thank you very much, and it just means, I guess, what you do is far more important than what you say. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Ms. Tenney, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today and hopefully taking up the adoption of what biosimilars can do for the Medicare program. Tremendous opportunity for seniors, particularly in my district where over 235,000 people in my district are seniors on Medicare. So that's 30% of my constituency, and many of them suffer from chronic conditions by some of the drugs that you've all mentioned today. And the biosimilars represent a critical opportunity to reduce healthcare costs and expand access to life-saving treatments for patients and their families, which we've seen. Despite their proven safety, efficacy, and significant cost savings with biosimilars sticker price averaging, we've heard testimony today, 40% less than their reference biologic, biosimilars continue to face adoption challenges. This is not just a cost issue for the Medicare program, but it directly affects patients and their ability to afford and access necessary therapies, particularly those with chronic or severe conditions, as I referenced. While small molecule generics typically experience rapid adoption due to lower costs and straightforward formulary inclusion, biosimilars seem to be trapped in a complex market dynamic that all too often undermines their utilization. Addressing the policies that hinder biosimilar adoption is essential, I think, and I'm thank you to the chairman for doing this committee. I first wanted to ask Mr. Burton, and right on this question, which you've answered, but if you could just say to me, you noted that biosimilars can cost 40% less than their reference biologics, yet adoption remains low. Why haven't the pharmacy benefit managers done more to adopt the biosimilars, given the potential savings and for introducing them in formularies, which in my district is filled with, by the way, not just a lot of locally owned and operated pharmacies that are really under a lot of pressure from the PBMs?
So where we've seen that most acutely is in the insulin and the Humira markets, where we have seen slow adoption. And really, when you break it apart, it's almost a clean dividing line between those plans and PBMs that are not rebate dependent and are early adopters. They're plans that do not use rebates and converted 90+% of their patient population to the biosimilars within months. The larger that are more rebate dependent have taken longer time.
Do you think there are other financial incentives at play here other than the rebate issue?
I mean, I think it's rebates and fees. It's all of those, any value accruing to the PBM that is based on the list price of the drug.
Well, what would you do if you're in my position and our position on this committee? What would we present in Congress? What could we do to get biosimilars on to the formularies and get that to happen, so more access to seniors, less cost, extremely costly in the state of New York, for example? What would you suggest we could do as a Congress to do that, to try to find these savings?
Sure. So I think the presumption needs to be that patients should have access to the lower cost biosimilar first. This is simply common sense. There are various ways you can do that. You can do that. I think someone suggested no rebates once a biosimilar is on the market. You can do that by requiring that plans cover biosimilars first. You can even do that by saying plans, if you're going to cover a brand product when there's a biosimilar, that's fine, but you have to show CMS that you're covering a product that is a lower net cost at the unit level, where you give the PBMs and plans that flexibility, but you create that presumption that they are covering and preferring the lowest cost product.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Pratt, I know, given your expertise on oncology and the Community Oncology Alliance, can you speak to the issues with the current incentive structure for providers using biosimilars under Part B and the sort of buy and bill system, and what steps can we take again? What can we do to solve this problem? I mean, as obviously 30% of my district are Medicare recipients, and I'll be joining them next year, by the way. So I care about this issue very much.
Thank you for the question. So the current nature right now of reimbursement is an add-on fee, and that add-on fee, sometimes you still end up purchasing drugs that your costs end up higher than what you're paid to give the drug, that causes a challenge in the marketplace. The other thing that's evolved, which is a complex market dynamic in the biosimilar space, but I'll give pegfilgrastim as a good example. This is a white blood cell growth factor that's used frequently to support patients through treatment as they receive chemotherapy. So pegfilgrastim branded Neulasta is a drug that came to the market. There are biosimilars on the market. ZX Extensio being one that was rapidly adopted by community oncologists. And because there were many biosimilars on the market, it did drive costs down. The rebate structure was such that it was kind of a race to the bottom. It quickly fell out of the marketplace because they were no longer able to make enough profits to continue to make the drug. And there's been further market instability because Udenica, which is an on-body injector version of this, also didn't have a stable supply chain for the same reasons. So I'll say, as a provider making a choice, you're underwater sometimes. And if there was an increase in reimbursement structure, it would provide stability for practice viability.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Moore, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the panel today, being here very insightful as we talk specifics, and unfortunately with healthcare policy, we have to dig into the details. It's not based in a bunch of rhetoric. There should be plenty of common ground from either side of the aisle, and getting to the root cause of increasing costs for patients is, I think, at the core of what we're trying to do here. I'm going to address some of the things that have kind of already been addressed, and so in an effort not to be redundant, feel free just to touch on a different aspect of it. The biosimilars is an important aspect. It's important to my district. I represent Salt Lake City, which is a really strong, very fast biotechnical industry, and it's it's something that we have to be willing to help them navigate these unique waters. So still a relatively new concept in the pharmaceutical industry, biosimilars. The FDA approved the first biosimilar only 10 years ago, and there are fewer than 80 on the market now. Patients aren't going to be as familiar or may even be skeptical on these drugs. You touched on price earlier, Dr. Edgerton. Aside from price, any other major concerns that you hear from patients on, and how do you address those?
Yes, thank you. I think predictability is important for patients as well. Again, in rheumatology, we're using these agents for many, many years. And one of the things that can drive consternation is if a patient has to keep changing the biosimilars as they proliferate. There can be 6 or 7 biosimilars for a single molecule. So we do have to think about that, I think, is when we're looking at lowering prices, particularly for the patient access, lower out-of-pocket costs. Having a patient switch between 7 different biosimilars over the course of their life may be an issue, and it may drive some consternation, and that does worry me to an extent. That being said, that's a little bit down the road from where we are right now. We're just trying to get access to biosimilars as they are.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Mr. Burton, as I mentioned, Salt Lake City, we had a field hearing there last year. Really, growing industry with regards to biotechnical. But today, as of today, there are no biosimilars that have been developed in our state. And you briefly touched on this in Representative Tenney's comments, but just add, again, from your perspective, what are the current roadblocks, disincentives that prevent manufacturers from developing these kind of drugs? What could be improved in the process to encourage development of biosimilars in a market that is obviously very engaged in this area?
Yeah, so I'd point you back to the report that the IQVIA Institute released earlier this year, where they found that 90% of the brand biologics that are going to lose patent protection over the next 10 years do not have biosimilars in development. That should be deeply concerning to all of us. There are a lot of reasons for that. It would be real easy if there were kind of one magic bullet. Unfortunately, there's not. The reasons for that, though, in a word, come down to predictability. Predictability of the review process, predictability of navigating patent thickets, predictability of what the market's going to look like when you finally get there in 10 years, as you think about the impact of IRA. And then predictability of, are you going to be able to get adoption, and is it going to be sustainable in the long run? Because we're seeing with some of these products, low prices are great, but there is a point at which these prices are going so low that they become difficult for providers to continue using them because they're getting reimbursed less than they're actually paying for the product.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, with almost a minute left, I'm going to yield back, but I'm going to come for that minute one day.
Okay, that's a deal. Ms. Sanchez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Improving access to biosimilars is an important and a bipartisan topic, but I think it's intellectually dishonest to talk about lowering costs for patients when RFK Jr. is effectively bulldozing our biometrical ecosystem to the ground. American biomedical research is the bedrock of American progress and innovation. So how does cutting NIH by 35% to the tune of about $2.6 billion, how does that lower drug costs? The NIH generates $2.56 in economic activity for every $1 invested in NIH research. That's a 256% return on investment for federal dollars, and I can't think of a single industry where that is the case. Still don't have an answer to how firing 3,500 FDA employees, that's 1 in every 5 people, improves patient safety as well as lowers drug costs. How does firing FDA's top vaccine official provide assurances for biopharmaceutical companies to invest in life-saving medicines? Here is what the president and CEO of Bio had to say on the removal of Dr. Peter Marks. And I'm quoting here, "The loss of experienced leadership at the FDA will erode scientific standards and broadly impact the development of new transformative therapies to fight diseases for the American people." And we saw an immediate slump in the markets after Dr. Marks's departure. Novavax dropped 6%, Sarepta dropped 10%, and Moderna dropped 12%. The Center for Drug Evaluation and Research within the FDA oversees biosimilars. This department streamlines the drug development process to ensure that patients have safe and effective drugs. Well, RFK Jr. decided to also gut this office. These career officials oversaw the development and the approval of biosimilars. Dr. Kesselheim, how do the vacancies impact the health of our biosimilar market?
Well, first of all, I think the vacancies that across all the institutions that you're talking about make it harder for us to have the essential discoveries that we need to develop the biologic drugs that will become the biosimilars of tomorrow. But then in terms of the specific vacancies at the FDA and the Center for Biologics Research, those vacancies make it harder for us to get biologic drugs onto the market because...
Can you slow down and repeat that again loudly so the people in the back can hear that?
Sure. The vacancies at the FDA, the firings at the FDA, the removal of funds from the FDA to do its work will destroy our medical establishment by making it harder for us to get the drugs that we need approved and onto the market, and it will undermine the confidence that patients and physicians have in those products, so that the difficult conversations we're already having with patients about biosimilars will just become harder, because they will now, in addition, wonder whether or not they went through a sufficient review process or were subject to the sufficient standards at the FDA if the FDA does not have the independent scientists that it needs to set down those guidelines and to review those applications in a timely fashion and to make those decisions. It will not be able to do that on the current path that the Trump administration has it on.
Thank you. And how does this regulatory uncertainty impact a manufacturer's decision to invest in the development of biosimilars?
I think it's far more than any of the other factors that have been discussed today. This will be the most important factor that will determine whether manufacturers invest in biosimilars, because they will not know whether or not their product will be given a fair review at the FDA, will be given a timely review at the FDA. They may look to develop products and submit them to other markets around the world. They may look to set up their manufacturing sites elsewhere around the world. They will not be able to rely on the FDA to do the work that it needs to do, that patients need the FDA to do.
Thank you. In Medicare Part B, biosimilars have lowered prices for beneficiaries and the Medicare program by 62%. But currently only 10% of biologics that could have biosimilar competition actually have it. Dr. Kesselheim, how does the FDA's current interchangeability guidance impact biosimilar uptick? Are there any concerns with eliminating the designation entirely?
Well, I think that originally there was a distinction made between biosimilars that were approved as being highly similar to biologic drugs and biosimilars that could be automatically interchanged without any safety concerns. And that was legitimate based on the science that we knew about biologics at the time. Over the past decade, that science has evolved, and we have become more comfortable with some biosimilar drugs being automatically interchanged. And in those cases, we need to have more flexibility to make those kinds of designations to try to improve fair uptake of biosimilars for which the science is there to support interchangeability. But without sufficient resources and good scientists at the FDA helping guide those decisions, we simply will not be able to do that with any confidence.
I thank you for your testimony, and I yield back.
Mr. Kustoff, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing today as well. I think we've all learned a lot. Mr. Burton, if I can with you, in your written testimony, you talk about a number of reasons that biosimilars are falling behind, one of which is the FDA. So if I could drill down a little bit more, ask you to explain, and then if you had a magic wand over the FDA, what would you do to address and solve that problem?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I'll start where we left it, right? Over the last 10 years, the science has evolved dramatically. What we knew about biosimilars 15 years ago when the pathway was first written into law is nothing compared to what we know today. So, for instance, today, I think the biggest regulatory hurdle that you run into that adds both time and cost to development is the requirement to do phase 3 clinical efficacy studies. That's something, again, that was reasonable at the time, but I think we are learning more and more that is not necessarily the best approach for all biosimilars. Now, should FDA continue to have that in their toolbox? No doubt. But today there are analytical methods that allow us to predict with far greater certainty how a product will behave in a patient than we're going to get out of clinical efficacy studies. So that's one thing that removing that as a requirement is, on the part of FDA is something that would move things forward. And it would also reduce the cost of development because a big chunk of the development cost is in that phase 3, simply buying enough of the branded product to do that comparison. Reducing that timing, but also reducing that cost is going to make this market more accessible to biosimilar developers broadly.
So, Mr. Burton, one other thing you brought up is barrier to marketing. So can you explain that and what are possible solutions to the marketing barrier?
Yeah, so Humira is kind of the poster child for this. I will confess I've lost count. I know it's 100+ patents that the brand had on Humira. Navigating that kind of a patent thicket is simply daunting, to say the least, for a biosimilar. There are ways you can address that by removing the ability of brands to build these patent estates that delay entry. I believe if you look at the adalimumab market, those biosimilars launched several years earlier in Europe. Now, certainly we are supportive of intellectual property and innovation, but there needs to be clarity for when a biosimilar can come to market and not getting stuck in 100 patents endlessly.
HHS Secretary Kennedy has talked about banning pharmaceutical ads on television. Assuming he does that and he's got that authority and they are banned, how does that affect biosimilars?
To my knowledge, biosimilars do not do direct-to-consumer advertising. That is typically a brand piece, so I probably don't have much to say on that one.
Well, does that, considering that and brands can't advertise if you play that out, Does that help biosimilars, or is it no effect, or how would you characterize it?
It's a good question. What I don't know is how much that advertising continues post biosimilar entry, and I think that's the question I would want to understand is that advertising continuing after a biosimilar entries? I think what we see as the big challenge really is the rebate of getting access in the first place. But I think you raise a good question that merits some exploration.
Thank you, Mr. Burton. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Mr. Stubbe, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Generic and biosimilar medicines drive significant savings in the healthcare system. In fact, use of generics and biosimilars have driven nearly $3.1 trillion in savings over the past 10 years. America's robust IP systems balances innovation and affordability, providing U.S. patients with more medicine choices than anywhere else in the world, while ensuring medicines cost remains a small, stable 14% of total healthcare spending. Owing to the success of this system, not only do we lead the world in the development of medicines, but we have a much higher rate of generic utilization in the United States, and they are 33% cheaper on average in the United States than other developed countries, with stringent price controls. But now the so-called Inflation Reduction Act is replacing this carefully crafted balance between innovation and competition with price controls. Dr. Pratt, can you explain from your perspective as a physician how the current reimbursement system under Medicare Part B discourages physicians from choosing and using biosimilars?
So reimbursement structure on the current Medicare Part B system, doctors can use biosimilars, but what's happening in the marketplace is as the cost goes down and average sales price goes down as they're competing on price, it creates a lot of instability in the market where average sales price by its nature is an average. And if practices purchase drugs, they can't sell them, they can't, you're underwater on some of those drugs. That makes it a difficult choice for some of those biosimilars. It's not viable for the practice to serve patients. And so it's a challenging reimbursement structure given the tremendous competition on price in today's biosimilar market.
Dr. Edgerton, in your experience, when have PBMs favored biosimilars over biologics?
That happens frequently. Currently, for one of the medications we use for rheumatoid arthritis, most commercial insurance plans that are served by a PBM are requiring one of two biosimilars as the first-line agent for treating that condition in the Part B office setting. Unfortunately, both of those biosimilars are underwater, so we wind up with this kind of perverse situation where the preferred medication, which should also be the lowest cost medication, cannot be obtained because of this situation where the acquisition cost of the drug is higher than the reimbursement. So it's not helpful that those medications are required by the PBM, so to speak, in that setting because the acquisition has been undermined.
Mr. Burton, based on your experience, can you explain why, even under the drug price negotiation provision of the IRA, a reference product or biologic might be preferred for formulary placement instead of the biosimilar?
Thank you for the question. Under the IRA, when a brand drug is selected for negotiation, goes through that negotiation process, as part of it, it is statutorily guaranteed Medicare coverage for the applicable payment year. The challenge, though, again, when you look at the timelines that IRA sets in place, and I'll use Stelara as an example for this. Stelara brand biologic was in the first round of selection for price negotiation, ended up with a price, negotiated price of minus 66% off list price. Subsequent to that, earlier this year, 5 biosimilars entered at list prices of minus 80% or more. So higher discount, cheaper products, right? But statutorily, next year in Medicare, Medicare plans are going to be required to cover the brand product, even though there are lower cost biosimilars available. Now, they may choose to also cover those biosimilars, but they're not required to. They're required to cover the brand product. And so, ironically, you could end up protecting some of the monopolies that IRA was intended to get at.
Have biosimilars been demonstrated to lower costs more than the government has been able to negotiate?
You know, in baseball terms, it's a small sample size, but yes, again, using that Stelara example, minus about 2/3 versus minus 80%, and we're 3 months into the market, so absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. My time's expired.
Mr. Horsford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Buchanan and Ranking Member Doggett. Congressional Democrats made historic progress in lowering prescription drug costs through the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. This legislation marked a major turning point in how we approach drug pricing in the United States. Among many things, the Inflation Reduction Act enabled the federal government to negotiate the prices of prescription drugs for the first time. This change alone is projected to save taxpayers $6 billion and Medicare beneficiaries $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket cost, just from the first round of negotiations alone. The law also capped the cost of insulin at no more than $35 per month for seniors. This one provision is expected to save more than 1 million people over $700 million. It also put a stop to unchecked price hikes. Now, when drug companies raise prices faster than the rate of inflation, they're required to pay rebates back to Medicare. That's already saving some beneficiaries about $4,600 a day. Last but not least, starting this year, out-of-pocket costs for prescription drugs are now capped at $2,000 annually for Medicare beneficiaries. That provision was based on a bill that I helped advance, the Capping Drug Cost for Seniors Act, and it's delivering real financial security to millions of older Americans. But I agree we must go further. That's why last week I introduced 2 bills to extend some of these critical protections beyond Medicare and into the private health insurance market. The first, the Lower Drug Cost for Families Act, expands the Medicare drug inflation rebate program by including sales of prescription drugs to privately insured patients when calculating required rebates. All rebate payments would then be returned to Medicare, strengthening the program's long-term solvency. The second bill, the Capping Prescription Drug Cost Act, would cap out-of-pocket prescription drugs at $2,000 per year for individuals and $4,000 per year for families with private insurance. We've made progress, tremendous progress, but there's more work we can do. And while me and my colleagues remain committed to reducing costs for all families, sadly, the Trump-Vance administration appears focused on destabilizing both the economy and the federal workforce. As we've heard, the FDA now has laid off 20% of its workforce. Dr. Kesselheim, is it accurate to say that biosimilar manufacturers need a stable marketplace and regulatory environment in order to confidently make long-term investments?
Biosimilar manufacturers need an effective, well-resourced, an expert, and an independent regulatory environment, as well as a stable environment, in order to make investments in their products and to bring those products to patients.
And how might the erosion of institutional knowledge at the Food and Drug Administration impact the approval process for future biosimilars?
Well, I think it's going to fundamentally make that process slower, because there are fewer people there to be able to support the work of the reviewers that are needed, and it's going to make it more complicated, because if there are not sufficient people there and with sufficient expertise to develop the guidances and have, drug companies do have many meetings with the FDA along the way of the development. This is not just a one-time event. where a drug company meets the FDA. And if people aren't available and don't have the expertise to bring to those meetings and to give guidance to companies as they're developing their products, that will make it much. That will make there will be a lot more ambivalence around companies investing in developing those products.
Thank you. So over 15 years ago, congressional Democrats fundamentally reshaped the U.S. healthcare system for the better with the passage of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. The ACA not only expanded health coverage to millions of Americans, but it also established a regulatory framework for the FDA to review and approve biosimilars. So again, Dr. Kesselheim, can you explain how the proposed cuts to Medicaid and changes to the ACA marketplace might impact the biosimilars market?
Well, I think that fundamentally we are going to see an enormous number of people stop having insurance, either through Medicaid or through the support that they need to buy insurance on the ACA exchanges. And as a result, more and more people will not have insurance and they will not be able to afford the biosimilars that they need. We've been talking all day about how much cheaper biosimilars are than biologic drugs, but you have to remember the cost of biologic drugs is tens of thousands of dollars a year. So even if a biosimilar is 40% cheaper, it's still tens of thousands of dollars a year. People still need insurance, fundamental good insurance, in order to pay for the drugs that they need in our current market. And if we take that away from them, they are just not going to be able to take their medications, and they are going to have bad outcomes from it.
Thank you. I know my time has expired. We have to protect Medicaid and the tax credit so that we make the Affordable Care Act, continue to make it affordable for the people in Nevada and all across this country. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Doggett also, thank you. And thank you very much for hanging in there. I particularly want to thank you for coming to talk to us about biosimilars. I just look at how much longer we are living, how much healthier we're living, the whole idea of better living through chemistry and biology. But also know this, just listening to the last couple of hours, what a complex task it is, and how concerned I am, I think all of us are, that the Trump-Vance-Musk administration is actively attacking virtually every part of that complex that makes it happen. The cuts at HHS have just been unbelievable. Last week, researchers at HHS were standing outside the building, coming to work, swiping their badges to find out whether they were fired or not, because they missed the 5 a.m. email that told them they were fired. When you fire 10,000 HHS employees, this is obviously a huge attack on the research to find the new cures. And then even when they are developed, you get all kinds of new roadblocks from this administration. Approximately 3,500 employees were fired from the FDA last week. And many of them were lifelong experts who work with innovators to get the new treatments and the new cures to market, and many requiring uniquely tailored pathways. They've also terminated hundreds, possibly thousands of grants at the NIH. I've had university president after university president coming in to talk about all the contracts that have been canceled and what it's meaning to their research. Because of NIH, cancer mortality has fallen 34% over the last 30 years. HIV infections have fallen by 2/3 since the height of the epidemic. And these are the researchers and projects who made the U.S. the envy of healthcare around the world. I led a letter with many of my colleagues about the communications freeze. Trump administration canceled NIH advisory council meetings. That's the final step in getting the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center grant approval process. And we know that 50% of Americans that reach 85 are going to have Alzheimer's. This is incredibly critical and important. Alzheimer's could eat up all of our Medicare budget, but they fired the necessary thing to get that done. They killed an NIH grant on coronavirus antiviral meds, and it's unheard of to kill funding that was contributing to understanding about the new cures. NIH is the largest single public funder of biomedical and behavioral research in the world. And all this means is that this incredible research and funding is going to go to Canada, to Germany, to UK, to France. This is the definition of America losing. Dr. Kesselheim, you're a Harvard Medical School professor. Can you possibly explain the thinking behind canceling all these NIH grants or firing all these people at the FDA or HHS?
Absolutely not. It makes no sense at all. Sorry. Do you want me to expand on that? It makes absolutely zero sense whatsoever. This kind of work is fundamental to the kind of to the scientific enterprise, to the cures of tomorrow, and to just throw it all out the window with in some cases with no warning, and to treat scientists like this who are trying to uncover treatments for diseases that we don't currently have treatments for, to bring more therapies to patients that can benefit, is cruel, and it makes no sense, and it is self-destructive for a scientific enterprise that is the envy of the world.
Let me go one step further, because so much of, well, not so much, but much of what Musk has done has been DEI related. If you're a woman, got to go, especially if you're a leading military figure. If it's dedicated to somebody that's African American or Hispanic, that research doesn't count. What's your concern about what's going to happen to precision medicine? Because we're finding once again that they terminated lots of grants that were precision medicine because they had the word black in it or the word woman in it. And yet we know that there's been an enormous gap in the amount of research done on women as research subjects versus men, and certainly on white Americans versus black Americans in terms of the disease research.
I mean, disparities exist in care, and disparities exist, and we, it is really important that we recognize these disparities in the way that we deliver care to patients, and how patients benefit from the drugs that are approved. And it is important that we try to work to make sure that everybody has access to the care that they need. And by ignoring it doesn't make it go away. And I think that it is ultimately problematic to everyone if we don't pay attention to the realities that exist. And for things like personalized medicine, that kind of work is not necessarily, if it's even down to the individual person personalized, which is where some of the vanguards of science are going these days. That kind of work is fundamentally supported by public funding until it is determined that it is scalable at a larger scale, and at that point, large companies may be interested in getting involved in it. And without that kind of fundamental work that's going on in our public institutions, we are not going to get the treatments that those individuals need.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yeah, I would like to thank our witnesses for appearing before us today. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made a part of the formal hearing record. And with that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.